Hello, and welcome to the Imaginary Movie Podcast, a podcast where we dive into the past and explore all the movies that you've never seen or even heard about. That's right, it's all the best pictures where we're watching all the Oscar winners from the start. My name's Sam, and I'm joined by my dashingly handsome co-host, Dave. Hi, Dave.
Hi, Sam. It's fun to sort of dive back into the 1930s. World War II's coming. Something to look forward to.
Good stuff. Brilliant.
I was just looking. I was momentarily distracted because obviously doing my research, I thought I'll bring up a list of who the nominees were this year. And then I was like, it's been a long... I have to go to work tomorrow. It's been a long day. And I was looking and I was like, I can't see the best picture. Why is the best picture not there? Apparently, it used to be called, and this is the first time I've noticed this, it used to be called the Academy Award for Outstanding Production that became the Best Picture.
Yeah,
and that momentarily wrong-footed me.
That is something we've never talked about, actually, I think, in the whole...
No, I think I've maybe noticed it before and not really given it loads of thought.
Because I think it's like it changes. It goes for, I think the first one was Academy Award for Outstanding Picture, and then it's Outstanding Production, and then it's Outstanding Motion Picture, and then it's the Academy Award for Best Motion Picture. And then from 1962 to the present, it's the Academy Award for Best Picture.
We've got 28 years of this before it's even the Best Picture.
I mean, holy moly. It's insane. We are 7 pictures.
This is the 7th annual Academy Awards. Probably didn't have the gravitas that it has today.
No,
7th.
We're 7 in. We've done 7 of these old movies, and I think as we plough, endeavour forward into
Ricochet,
bounce off the walls of exploring these movies. I think it is really fascinating. Last time we did Cavalcade, which was Frank Lloyd movie that was kind of rubbish, and
it was.
And at this time, for 1934, we're doing It Happened One Night, which is a Frank Capra, remember that name, screwball comedy.
This guy's going places.
Yeah, Clark Gable and Claudette Colbert. Oh, it's a romantic comedy, Dave. It's probably the first romantic comedy to win an Academy Award. Or Best Picture anyway.
Yeah.
And it's, I think, definitely a film that you can see the long tail of. You can see the influence that a movie like this has had. And despite me attempting to, think about
let's say it right now. I really liked this movie. And Sam, who hates everything and has no fun bone in his entire body, hated this.
I didn't hate it. But I think what I just, when a film just doesn't speak to you, it's speaking, it's got lots to say, but it's about how much it actually connects with like my inner being or whatever. And this is just a movie that I'm just like, cool, interesting. Thanks. This is an interesting Wikipedia page that I've read about it. Congratulations. And then that's about as far as it goes. So why did you like this, Dave? In fact, I'll do an introduction in case you haven't seen this before. You absolutely haven't seen this before. So a rogue reporter trailing a runaway heiress for a big story joins her on a bus heading to Florida, from Florida to New York. And they end up stuck with each other when the bus leaves them behind at one of the stops along the way. And it's a road movie. It's opposites attract. And
you've seen this movie 10 bajillion times.
You have.
It's quite interesting, really, because, and obviously we haven't watched a lot of romantic comedies from the 30s, obviously.
Have you listened?
Because as we say quite a lot on the main feed, I think comedy ages the worst a lot of the time.
Yes.
I think it really is quite a singular comedy that kind of like speaks through the ages. We say it all the time. Some Like It Hot, A Fish Called Wanda. I'm going to hesitantly say the Monty Python films, but I haven't seen them in 15 years. So
yeah, maybe.
But like comedy, generally, it's really only the really standout stuff that like Who's on First, that stands the test of time and remains funny all these years later. And a lot of other stuff, I'm thinking about this. Something About Mary was fucking abysmal. A lot of the 90s comedy movies we've done have aged quite poorly, and they're not funny, and they're quite offensive. And Ace Ventura, we've been attacking Jim Carrey a lot lately, but Ace Ventura.
I mean, it's a bit of it's a comedy movie, isn't it? It's a bit of a kids.
It was a comedy when it came out, Sam. Now it's like a horrible piece of hate speech about transgender people.
It's insane, and you're exactly right, because.
But comedy. This is the trouble: is that comedy, I think, and I would say I've seen some comedies from this era, and a lot of them are fairly is this meant to be funny? Because I think the idea of what was funny was very different in 1934 when this movie was released than it is now. However,
yes,
I think that this movie, for better or for worse, and we can maybe talk through some of the things that you didn't like, because I'm interested, and I probably don't necessarily even disagree. For better or for worse, this is quite a singular movie, I think, because it was made by Frank Capra is a very prominent director of his era, made a few films that, generally considered some of the best films ever made, and I think this is really good, and I'm willing to, I'll argue about that in a minute. But this became the blueprint, I think, for so many movies that, just off the top of my head, I haven't seen it, but there's a Gerard Butler, Jennifer Aniston movie where they're driving across the country and they fall in love. He's a bounty hunter or something. There's movie where that slew of movies where Hugh Grant has an assistant or someone he's caring for or something. The whole people shoved together, opposites shoved together and they fall in love. There's a million of these movies, and I think the DNA comes from movies like this.
Yeah.
Which probably draws it from plays even earlier,
Well, let's start off with my curmudgeonly view, but the positives, because actually I think you're right, Dave, that this is a stand out picture, because as much as it's obviously made in 1934 and there's lots of elements that give that away, it doesn't feel like even some of the other 30s movies that we've done that won Best Picture. It has, I think, a very quote unquote modern sensibility, in that you can kind of see how this has laid the foundations for a lot of movies that you've just listed there.
I will say, for film stock nerds out there, I think we watched the 2013 remaster. This has been quite heavily remastered to look like the original, but I think that also helps. Cavalcade we watched looked like a 90-year-old film reel, whereas this doesn't. This is very it's very crisp. It's a very good looking
how
movie.
It looks and the presentation, but also I think how it's shot and the story and the characters. We've seen it. These are archetypal in many ways, the type of characters that we see in romantic comedies, and especially I think the kind of gender politics of this movie.
Boy, I'm so glad, but Sam,
hold on. Let me finish.
We fixed the bad gender politics.
No. Let me finish the sentence. The gender politics that we see in this movie, I think, has translated quite effectively to many of the films that are still being made in the 90s. When Harry Met Sally is pretty much this movie, in that you've got a slightly whimsical, slightly she's punchy, but she's also got a soft side, and then you've also got the man who's very I'm kind of sharp and witty, but also by the end I will show my love and
sort of
kind of, which is exactly what you see in Harry Met Sally as well. The same characters that come through the screen. So, it certainly does. It certainly does deserve its place, I think, in the Academy Award lists, and also as being a really, really influential, important, and I'm going to say the word, and it's the word that we always say about movies that we have watched and go, it's an interesting movie. I was interested, but I didn't really enjoy it. It wasn't enjoyable.
I couldn't disagree more. I thought this was really fun. I liked the banter between the two leads. I love a road movie. This is a road movie. I love how stupid it is. The scene. I love how condescending the guy is. I really love this movie. I found myself smiling through the end credits of this movie, and it's mushy and it's stupid, and it doesn't really earn the ending of them getting together and being happy. But
slow down. There's so many things.
No. We can. It's fine, Sam. We can veer wildly all over the place. It's our podcast.
I know, but I want to talk about all of them.
What I'm trying to say is that I think this is really good, and this is the trouble of like, if only we had a third friend we could fucking entice or blackmail into being on the podcast.
Impossible.
Because I really do think this is one of those things, and it's totally fine. It's totally fine not to like a movie. I think we're gonna talk back and forth and maybe like argue our points over the plot a little bit in a minute. But I would really actually like a third opinion on this, sort of like, to understand whether this does have appeal or whether my brain is broken in a very
No, because I think you're not wrong in any points. But what I like to get into, and so some of the reasons that you enjoy this is because of, I think the relationship between Gable and Colbert is really, really key, isn't it? And the character development that we see throughout this film, the way that the characters interact and has as the relationship kind of veers closer together and further apart, it's so important. And I think this is the kind of important. This is the crucial part of the movie, isn't it? You have to believe and you have to be receptive to the fact that this pretty controlling man, because it's the 1930s, is like kind of charming in a way. I mean, I think that's the essence of the film, isn't it? Is that she's this lost little dove who's flapping around trying to break away from daddy's clutches, and he's there as this man, as a man's man, who's gonna like guide her through life almost.
Do you know what it is? So that's obviously the thing that I think ages the worst in this movie is the gender politics, which is funny because I don't think we're that far advanced from this in modern movies. Like I said, certainly the movies we've cited, some of which are quite modern. Apparently women are still attracted to men who treat them like shit. That seems to be something Hollywood is ramming down our throats. And it could be worse. It could be Harvey Weinstein, and I'll leave that joke there. But I think there's a real like Richie Rich aspect to this movie, and I think that's the way it speaks to me, is that Colbert's character, I think she falls, quote unquote, falls in love with Clark Gable's character. I think because he treats her like shit, not because that's, quote unquote, what women want men to do. I think it's more that it's the most real way that a man in her life has treated her. We see it very early in the movie. The movie opens, let's talk about the good things about this movie. Let's talk through the plot and we can have this conversation as we go. And so the movie opens and you've got Colbert is a prisoner on a boat, basically. And she's married to somebody and her dad won't let her leave, and he's going to get the marriage annulled, and she's under guard, basically. And the first motion of the movie is great. We have cut the first act. We don't have to see her marriage, her first running away. This movie doesn't need to be 14 hours long. She jumps off the boat and the movie has started. Are you paying attention?
Yeah. It is a good thing, and it's interesting to see that cut the first act very, very clearly in such a...
It's something we say quite a lot, generally, isn't it?
We don't need to see how we got there. We're here, and that's the important thing. Now, this is maybe where it gets off on a slightly wrong foot, and I don't want to be the woke, king over here who's decrying anything. But I'm like...
Whoa, a gendered fucking regal term, Sam. Wow. What's wrong with woke queen?
Well,
What's wrong with woke democratically elected leader? It's a bit mouthy, sure.
A collective approach to wokery, yeah.
Yeah,
but
woke ruling council elected from common folk.
On 6-month terms, so that we can constantly rotate So we're not
Nothing
having any
ever gets
hegemony.
done. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
People starving in the street. It's great.
But it's accountable. It's directly accountable. So, the thing that annoys me is that you start off this movie and you're like, I know it's the 30s, but I mean, you've adopted this woman. You've abducted this woman, haven't you? That's what you've done, and you won't let her leave. And the dad, especially, I think, is absolutely instrumental in this. And it's such an important thing to remember, listener, is that the dad is absolutely the one who's saying, no, you can't leave. I want her, and then when she does run away, I want her found. Damn it! Send out the dogs. Send out the dogs with bees in their mouth, and so when they open their mouths, bees shoot out. Like it is just an absolutely critical part of this story is that the dad.
It's quite wild, isn't it? I think, and again,
maniac.
I've done in the grand tradition of this podcast absolutely no research. I think this is maybe a reflection of like earlier literature. I've read books from the like Victorian era Britain, like Dickensian stuff, where there is this like Jeeves and Woostery like upper class. The way that the upper classes act, I think, is detached maybe. So I think this is something that us not being, adults going to the cinema in the 1930s, I think this is maybe something that has been lost in translation, where it would be much more readily acceptable that a rich father would treat his daughter and heir this way, and that would be maybe not acceptable because the movie's telling us that, like, oh, of course it's not okay, but maybe a bit more expected or a bit more like in the normal realm of how these people act.
Well, I think that's right, and I think it also reflects the role that comedies play in our society and in the 30s as well, is that we're kind of like pushing the boundary. Like that's what comedy movies do, and it's why they don't age.
If you were a woman, you couldn't have a bank account unless it was co-signed by a man.
Yeah. Until the 1970s, until the mid-70s, that is the case. So, like, the fact that a woman is being controlled, and I think this movie is kind of pushing up against, maybe not that this is happening everywhere, but it's a taboo enough thing, and that actually we're pushing the boundary to say, no, we want women want to have independent control of their lives, and so we've got this comedy movie, which again, like a lot of comedies, they're there to push the boundaries, and it's why they don't age well, because we're going to be going, I don't understand the context of this 90 years later, in the same way that we are watching, I guess, Ace Ventura 2. I mean, I'm not condoning it in any way, but in the 90s, everyone is absolutely terrified of trans people. And so we get these comedy movies come in, and some do it better than others, but they grasp onto the issues of the day and they shake them about, and everyone laughs. And then 20 years later, it's very uncomfortable about the fact
and this movie is 90 years old, and it's worth remembering that.
Yeah.
Again, I think that if you kind of buy that, like, the rest of the movie plays a lot better.
And I didn't. And I think
this is how we get into the core of it, basically. Again, and I love what you said, like, that a movie speaks to you and this movie didn't speak to you, and I think that's the best way we've ever described that. Like, it's fine not to like a movie because
you're a massive misogynist who wants to control women, and I'm not. I
think it's my flapper thing, Sam. I think it's just give me a woman in a bonnet, and you know what I mean. I'm a bit more receptive to whatever's going on in the movie.
Yeah.
That's been borne out by all of these 1930s movies we've watched.
Yeah, it really is. And as co-leader of the commune, the woke commune that I'm in charge of, with my co-leader, then I'm going to really have you strung up and burned, because that's what you deserve, Dave. That's what you deserve. Let's talk about the casting here. Clark Gable is...
This is a point, actually, where I want to just briefly mention... before we talk about the cast, I want to mention just briefly... that this is based on an article in Cosmopolitan. That's right, Sex in and the City, by Samuel Hopkins Adams, who is an interesting bloke who was a mudraker. He's a journalist, like, known for being quite like a mudraking sensationalist, like a tabloid journalist, we would call them 20 years ago, I suppose, because that term is wildly outdated. And he also wrote a series of erotic risque novels under a pseudonym, which were risque because they featured women having like sexual desires and urges, which for the 1930s was very
crazy,
on the edge. And this man, obviously it's written by a man, obviously a man has to be pushing the boundaries of books about women having desires. But I just think that's interesting.
Really accurate as well.
And it's based on a book on this article he wrote, which is like it's called Night Bus or something really. It's a shit name, but the story I think is the idea that the movie takes place on a bus.
Yeah, just like in the 30s, we are pulling ideas directly from other mediums, and there are no original thoughts in cinema, which kind of holds true to today, doesn't it, as well? Yeah, let's talk about Clark Gable then, and
let's talk about Clark Gable's moustache. Ring, 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 ring. It's facial hair corner. It's hair corner. Do you think this moustache was popular outside of the 6 months either side of when this movie was made?
I guess he had the moustache for quite a long time. Clark Gable, you do think of as having that pencil moustache, so maybe, I don't know. I think he's almost quintessential in terms of that 1930s, 40s leading man, Clark Gable. So when you look,
it's really cool to see Clark Gable, more than 4 months removed from his fatal heart attack from eating steak for breakfast every day of his life, washed down with a pint of whiskey. Like, it's kind of weird.
When did he die? He died in 1959. 1960, aged 59. So we are still quite young. We do have, I think, at least have got the next movie we're doing after this one, Mutiny on a Bounty, also stars him in an Oscar-nominated movie, and then obviously Gone with the Wind is the big one, isn't it? That is the tentpole movie that we are going to be coming back to, the most the highest grossing box office movie of all time, even inflation adjusted. So clearly Clark Gable is a really impressive actor, and
I kind of get it. He's quite magnetic in this movie.
He is very magnetic. Yeah,
like he's good. I think it's a fun performance. He's kind of like, he's a bit broad, perhaps. We talked about this in earlier 1930s movies, that I think the performances are broader maybe than they would be even 10 years later. But I think he's really solid. You kind of can't help but watch what he's doing when he's on screen.
Yeah, I agree. There's certain scenes I think that really that work better. I think at the beginning when he's quite cold and he's a bit more
when he's actively drunk when he gets on the bus. Yes, he's quite despicable at that point.
And I guess it's the point as well, because it probably reflects the fact that this is what men were like, and we get the other man who's talking to him, talking to Claudette Colbert until he says, "Oh, it's my husband. I'm her husband," and then he's very apologetic to him, not to this poor woman.
Men.
Imagine being a woman in the 30s. Imagine being a woman now, but in the 30s, Jesus.
Doing something so simple, on the face of it, by the way, doing something as simple as wanting to get on a bus.
Just existing. Just the constant need to be thinking about all these fucking lecherous pieces of shit everywhere. It's just insane. I'm continually aghast or shocked that women haven't just risen up and put us all into, cages, because I think it's no less than we deserve. As a general.
Some people pay good money for that, Sam.
I know, exactly. See, already you've perverted it. You disgusting man. You're getting counsel from... I'm going to go speak to the council, the woke council, to see if I can get a motion seconded that will censor you.
Sweet. Well, I'm going to start my own Joe Rogan style podcast. I'm going to react very, very poorly to that.
Seconds. It happened in seconds. Gable's good. The scene that I think really connects, and then we can bring in Claudette Colbert as well, is the one where they're pretending to have an argument when the police come in. They're looking for her because the resources of the state are being utilised to track this woman down who had the audacity not to want to marry someone. Crazy.
Once again, Sam, it's great watching the 90-year-old movie and knowing that we've fixed the injustice in the world where people with unending amounts of money can just buy their way into or out of anything.
Yeah.
Wait.
Hey, pal, go and do this thing for me because I'll grease the wheels of your retirement.
Which
fund
is
if you do.
especially relevant in another year where Donald Trump is running for president.
It's good stuff. Solid stuff.
Like, if anything, it's gotten worse. It's just phenomenal. This feels like old time. Like, oh my god, he's just hiring police to track his daughter down.
Yeah, I mean it's great, but the scene where the police come in and they're looking for it, and they basically play act, and they have this massive argument.
And do you know what the funniest thing about this scene is? Like, is the key thing is that I know it sounds silly, but they're both good actors, and so even when they are acting, and this is always impressive in movies, is it's not Clark Gable doing this impression of, you know, and Colbert doing the impression of these like yokels that they are, and this couple who are involved in domestic abuse and all sorts, right? It's the characters acting. Like, there's an extra layer to it. It's the characters acting, and they're both pretty convincing. Like, they're both doing a bit of a broad accent. Like, you know, they're laying it on quite thick, and I think he hits her at one point. You know, it's really full on, and they both commit very well to it. It's a very well put together scene. Again, so that the police will believe they're a couple.
And then they're like, "Oh fucking hell, Jesus Christ! We'll just leave you alone."
Okay, Sam. Top five reasons the police will leave you alone. You threatened to assault your wife. Oh, everything's fine here. Nothing to see here.
Later. It's the 30s. Don't worry about it. It's fine. Like, Jesus Christ. The way they both just start laughing and giggling as soon as brilliant. Like, actual genuine warmth between these characters. And I think we hit one of my stumbling blocks again. Is that the chemistry between the two, I think, is quite strained a lot of the time. Now, Claudette Colbert, she came on board. I don't think either of them were first choice, but she came on board and basically wasn't particularly happy to be here. Didn't really think the script was any good. Asked for rewrites and made suggestions as shooting was had commenced, and basically just didn't have a good time. Now, I think we do have to have some real, she's just difficult to work with energy to this.
She's a diva.
Where women making absolutely any request whatsoever are difficult to work with, and we're going to just dismiss them as being, crazy or whatever, which is still happening now. But in the 30s, maybe it's even worse. However, whatever was going on, she clearly wasn't very happy. And I think, for me, in her whole performance, and especially in the relationship and the chemistry with Clark Gable, I did feel like she's being held back, or she's holding back. There's just not the same essence. There's not the same energy or verve that she's bringing in the same way that Gable
it's a bit more muted, I would certainly say, especially compared with Gable, who I think is a lot more game for a lot of the things that they're doing in this movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, as usual in a movie like this, it's all fun, and the whole tone of the movie is quite relaxed and fun. But there's a couple of times where it gets quite dark. There's a couple of moments in this movie that I think wouldn't maybe pass the editors in today's day and age.
The woke council, you might say. Yes.
Not even the woke council, Sam. I think like the ratings board would be like, I don't know. And the first is when, and it's a really funny scene. It's when Clark Gable threatens the guy on the bus, and he's basically like, "We're gonna kidnap her and cut her up, and we're gonna we can ransom her to the family."
Yeah, but for some context, the guy's like, "So what's going on with this broad, eh?" And he's thinking like, "Oh well, I'll give you a help out with whatever you're up to," and Clark Gable takes that the implication of that, and then pushes it beyond what he's
to intimidate this guy so that he doesn't want anything to do with it.
Thanks, I'm so glad you're here. What you want a head? Have a head. It's fine. Like, I don't need it. And completely.
I think what he says is like,
it's not a quote from the film, but
he's like, we could have some trouble with the law if you got a gun. And the guy's like, No, I haven't got a gun.
No,
It's okay.
kids,
I've got some
kids.
machine guns in my suitcase. It's fine. I'll give you one of those.
Yeah.
You okay for heavy stuff? It could get real dicey. We have to shoot our way out of this next station because the police are going to stop us, and my gang should be there, so it should all be fine. And just as long as the girl doesn't die, it's all fine. And it's like really laying on thick. And this guy's like, I have a wife, I have kids, and the guy's and he's like, you're in now. I've told you the plan. You're in. You've got to be in. Do I have to take care of you? And it's good comedic, good comedy, but it's also a bit like, wow, this guy's really laying out a pretty crazy scenario here.
Yeah, just a casual. Yeah, we're gonna just murder her and chop her up in the woods. Of course we are. Like that's a normal thing to be doing. It's the 30s. It's fine. Everything's fine. Like there is a bit of an energy. Even as the film progresses, though, I think there are examples of this where Clark Gable is just quite obnoxious to this woman. And there's so many times where I'm thinking, what is it you're trying to achieve here? And because like even the bit where she's like dunking like a biscuit or something into some tea, and he's like having a go at, he's just shouting at her because she's not dunking correctly. Didn't anyone teach you how to dunk? I'll show you how to dunk. And it's like, dude, you need to calm down. You need to calm down. Like what are we talking about here? And all the way through the movie, there's this weird. I think the problem is that his motivation is kind of confused. He's a journalist. He's looking for a story, and the story is that this debutante heiress is run away from home. Remember the dad? The dad, he's really important because he's trying to like bring her back by any means possible. And
dead or alive?
Yeah, who cares? And he's kind of interested in this story, so that's the kind of goal for him at the start, is that he's trying to befriend her and realizes who it is. Oh, okay, and then I'm going to go at the press with this story, but then I'm going to go back on it.
Well, I think the initial thought is that
it's quite confusing.
He wants to get her story, and he wants the exclusive because that's the value, and it's to further his own career, and then And then, so he's incredibly dismissive of her, I think, because of the way that she's acting. Like, she wants to buy a box of chocolates on the bus, and she's only got like $1.40, and he's like, how are you going to, because they're traveling by bus from Florida to New York. It's like a 4 or 5 day trip or something like that. Mm-hmm. And so he's basically like decided that she's incapable of taking care of herself because she's pampered and she's spoiled. And like, to a certain extent, he's not wrong. Like, the ultra wealthy, and so that informs everything. So down to like, do you know how to wash? Can you wash? Can you iron? Do you know how to do any of these things? And it does get a lot, but that's kind of the seed of that, is that he doesn't believe that she basically knows anything about what normal people go through,
because she's entitled and rich and doesn't live in the real world.
Yeah, there's certainly a class thing going on at the heart of this.
Yeah, but I think so much of that is lost because she's not actually that objectionable. Now, I think if you make it that she is a rich, upper class, snooty, and she looks down on people, and you actually give her like some individual character traits that are negative, that it kind of works. But they don't really do that, do they? They kind of keep her as this like happy-go-lucky, if a bit clueless, but not necessarily. I think if you kind of made her a little less redeemable, and that she could then redeem herself through her actions, we might actually have that narrative and that arc progress. And Clark Gable's character could have the similar thing where he goes from being this exploitative, hey, listen to me, bro, doll guy, into actually, oh look, this woman isn't an alien, which is, one of our podcast tropes, is like, women are aliens, and this woman, he treats her like an alien.
Think, again, the movie maybe doesn't nail it, but we kind of do have a few moments of him getting his comeuppance for being so egotistical, like his speech about how to flag down a car, like, to hitchhike. God, that's something else that just has gone away, does not exist anymore.
You want to get murdered?
You want to get murdered or run over on the motorway? It's hitchhiking, and it's like, So he's like, oh, well, there's 3 types of hitchhiking, and they never failed. There's this one and then there's that one. It's a whole funny, bit of a vaudevillian almost sort of comedy bit. And then Colbert sort of says, do you mind if I try? And it's kind of like a Looney Tunes moment where she pulls her skirt up a little bit to show her knee, or her thigh rather, and like 15 cars fucking crash, into a tree.
Like it is
like,
yeah,
and
like
a car pulls over, and that's a moment of like, I guess her proving that she maybe has resources at her disposal that Gable doesn't. And again, I'm not saying that that's not misogynist in the way that it's presented, and certainly when you read the trivia, like I'm not saying that it's not a bit objectionable, but it is a moment that this movie chooses to kind of take Gable down a peg, and that therein lies the seed of all of these other movies where you have the bickering people who hate each other, and by the end of the movie they'll be in love.
Yeah, which is it. It's a story as old as time, isn't it? It's interesting you mentioned her, her sexuality and lifting up the skirt to show some low, because this is, I think, one of the last pre-Hays Code movies, which is the film industry's kind of self-censorship, which brought in lots of rules. And so for like 20 years after this movie came out, I think like 3 months or 4 months later, we wouldn't get a lot of this type of stuff in movies, or if we did, it would be really kind of countercultural or made in Britain, or there would be other ways they'd have to get around this. Famously, Hitchcock did at the end of, I think, Vertigo, where the train drives into the tunnel as the happy couple, the train drives into the tunnel. Get it? Like there's lots keep up. There's lots of allusions to stuff, but really this is quite raunchy. This is quite a raunchy movie in a lot of ways, and I think you start to see it in, I think, like Some Like It Hot we mentioned already was on the tail end of this stuff, and by the 50s, people have
we've seen it in a few of the movies we've watched where, and it's something as simple as like the Hays Code. I think if you first start reading about it, you're like, oh my god, they got rid of all the smut. Where's the smut? Shut the door. You're letting all the smut out. And certainly we've got an aspect of that in movies today as well. But I think actually what it's getting rid of is kind of like, it's actually really tame suggestion. So even this movie, flashing towards the end, even the illusion that the walls of Jericho are coming down when they take the blanket down that separates them in the room, like, and the implication is that they're gonna have sex.
They're gonna do it.
And this pre Hays Code movie where they're married before they have sex, because sex is one thing. Like admitting that people have sex in a movie is one thing, but we can't have people having it out of wedlock.
No.
But the idea that it's kind of like a very clear like, and then they banged. The Hays Code was like, you can't have that. You cannot. Do you know what I mean? Make it that clear. So you have the Hitchcock thing where you're like, the train going into the tunnel.
Get it? Yeah. There's lots of weird things. One of my favorite things about the Hays Code is that they couldn't have them kiss for more than 3 seconds, and so I think in one of the Hitchcock movies they would kiss for 3 seconds, they would pause, and then they would kiss again, and then they would pause, and then they would kiss again. So we really like towards after this point we start to just really the ridiculousness of this. But it's interesting to see it in the kind of the early, pre-Code movies, which we are now going to be leaving as we go on to the next.
Yeah, and we haven't watched anything massively raunchy. Obviously, we only do the Best Picture.
Yes, violent.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think.
But a lot of the movies we've watched have been quite suggestive. I think.
Which is kind of reflects the time anyway, doesn't it? So as this film progresses, I really...
They beat a man up and steal his car, and that's never mentioned again.
Oh yeah, they do that. I think there's so much of the mechanics of this movie, how we get from A to B, that I'm just like...
I don't think it's worth boiling over, really.
No.
It kind of all culminates, doesn't it? After the road trip, it culminates in the in the won't they. We've had the will they, and now we're having the won't they.
Where they break, because he goes into the newspaper office and says, "I've got this story," and
she tells him she loves him, and he, because he's a 1934-year-old man, says nothing. Waits for her to fall asleep, packs all of his belongings, gets in the car and drives to New York, which obviously should be the signal of he has reciprocal feelings. And he goes to basically sell their story to his editor and get some money because he doesn't want to be.
So that he can go back to her, because he's like, oh, I've got to get back before she wakes up. So he can go back to her with
I will
the
say,
money,
Sam,
so
I will say, I think most men are this stupid. I didn't have any trouble believing that this man could have logicked this out somehow, that all of this made sense.
The logic of, I'm going to leave, pack up all my stuff in the middle of the night, drive for 3 hours, go see my editor, tell him that I've got this great story, I need 10 grand. What they want to do something.
$1,000. It's $1,000.
They want to do something though. There's like this. I can't remember what it is, but there's this goal they both want to do.
Some it's some pathetic, not pathetic, but like it's really.
They want to go on, they go escape to the beach or whatever, and then he's going to drive back another 3 hours, and he's going to.
He'll be tired from driving.
I've got the cash. At 6 o'clock in the morning when he's back in, and she's going to be like, great. I mean, it's. I think, Dave. I think you can't argue with me at this point. This is where the film just craps the bed, just absolutely loses its mind, and has no idea what it's doing. And I'll tell you why. Because this all falls apart. They just leave. They separate, and then she goes. She just forgets everything that she's been doing for the last hour and 20 minutes. And just says, "Oh well, I may as well just go marry this loser that I left, and I caused all this fuss." And
yeah, so this is the most inconsistent part of the movie, where the dad, again, scenes missing on this one.
Remember him, guys? The one who pushed
from the first scene. We haven't seen him. We've had maybe 1 or 2 scenes of him being like, "You gotta find her, alive or dead. I mean, alive, sure, but maybe dead. Shoot her in the face. No." Only the legs. Break her legs. It's fine. And the dad basically, I think, decides, again, scenes missing a little bit, decides that he would just rather have his daughter back. And so he'd just let her do what she wants to do. So basically he makes his peace with the husband, Mr. Burns, that they will put a story out that says they've reconciled. And if she comes back, then the dad will okay the marriage, blah, blah, blah. By this point, Colbert has decided she's in love with Clark Gable, because, again, side by side with Mr. Burns. What's the comparison here?
To be clear, Mr. Burns is like the stuffy, who isn't given any real, like, he's not given any kind of.
He's like an aristocrat. Is he British or is he not? Or did I imagine that?
But how many times have we seen this character in movies? The quite well-meaning but a little bit hapless or just kind of a bit controlling husband-like figure who the young girl rejects because I'm not going to do what my daddy says, or I'm going to be my own woman. I'm going to pick the newspaper guy who's tells me I can't dunk biscuits correctly. Okay. But this is the crucial part because the dad just switches. You say a little bit of scenes missing. Dave, it's the whole fucking movie. I mean, this is where it collapses because all of a sudden the dad's like, so you don't love the guy that I picked for you? That's surprising.
No, we're going too far here because the dad didn't pick this other guy either. Where I think the movie goes too far is where they use the dad as the fucking plot contrivance to get these two back together at the end of the movie. I think everything the dad does up until that point, I think is somewhat like you can work it out with a little bit of like, I wish that had a scene there, but it's when he gets Gable into his office and says, "Do you love my daughter?" And because Gable writes him an angry letter saying he wants his money, and it turns out it's like $39 or something, all the money he spent on the trip of the suitcase he lost and the coat he lost and stuff.
Yeah.
And the dad's like, "Do you love my daughter?" And then basically he tells the daughter like, "Hey, you should go and bang this other guy. I don't like this guy. You should totally run away. Like the car's right there." And it's like, could you not have written a more believable or maybe more convenient way to kind of, because you need this to happen in order to have the conclusion of the movie which thematically makes sense in the construct of this romantic comedy archetype. But to have the dad character do it is like, you're the guy who started this movie off by unlawfully imprisoning your 21-year-old daughter.
Yeah. But we've seen it before. We've seen it since, in fact. We've seen it where we've got but Daddy, I love him. And the dad's like, no, you're not going to blah, blah, blah. But then eventually, because, okay, sweetheart, you go for it. Go on, you go and enjoy your life. And, like the journey, the arc that we could have had of the dad character. But the problem is, as you say, scenes missing. We don't get to see it at all. I know it's a movie from the 30s, Dave, but there's no excuse, I don't think, for this type of just completely dropping the ball. Because if you don't have the scene where, but Daddy, I love him, then what do we end with? We end with this mental autogyro scene. Are they selling autogyro?
I love the autogyro. And the fact that it's just in the movie, it's not like a...
For no fucking reason. A plane with a helicopter blade on top.
Put this on the 9 o'clock autogyro to Siam.
Siam, yeah. Yeah, thanks, Mr. Burns. It's a total I think failure of the script writing, that what you end up with is this just jarring ending where on the wedding day the dad is like, still want to marry him? The guy that I literally imprisoned you and then orchestrated a national manhunt to ensure that you did marry? And she's like,
didn't marry.
That's what he did at the start. And then she goes, yeah, I suppose so, up until the very point where they say, do you take Mr. Burns to be your lawfully wedded husband? And she's like, no, runs off. And the dad's like, knocking back a beer, thinking, job done. Great stuff. What? Baffling.
It's a weird thing, because initially the dad doesn't want her to marry anyone. That's the whole point of her being imprisoned, is because she's married this guy, and the dad isn't happy about it.
But then he is happy about it.
And then he's like, oh no, but you should marry this journalist who I met, who was rude to me. And I think it's part of it is because they hadn't. Maybe it works better in the book. I don't know. But
you
part
mean
of it,
the Cosmopolitan article that this is based on.
Yeah. Part of it, I think, is that we don't have a lot of characters in this movie. There aren't a lot of other people we meet who can kind of like convey this information.
Yeah.
You kind of need an Alfred type, like butler type, who maybe helps her escape the boat, and then so we prove early on that we have a save the cat moment for another character who isn't the dad, or a maid, or God help us if we could have two women with lines in this movie.
Insane.
Maybe like another character who can exist, who can come back at the end and say, hey, I overheard what that journalist friend of yours said to your dad, and he only wanted $39. And she's like, why would he only want $39?
I'll tell you who it is, Dave. I'll tell you who it is. It's the gay best friend. That's the character.
In 1934. I think it's the effeminate best friend in 1934.
I know. But in terms of, and I'm not being, I'm being stereotypical in terms of how movies present characters like this, is that you get the gay best friend to be the one to say, either to the dad or to her, no, you can't. Like, I'm gonna be the character that brings the agency to you and says you can do. You need a character like that. You need this in between. It's not Clark Gable. It's that I'm gonna crack your two heads together. You both love each other now. Sort it out. Characters that we see throughout romantic comedies in the 80s, 90s, 2000s. It's all there for us, and I think it's where I kind of swing back to my initial point, which is that despite the fact this movie is a real mess in the last act, basically, you can, it's actually quite modern, and I think some of the plot points in this, while stupid, aren't any less stupid than what romantic comedies would be in 90 years' time. Like some of the
it could just be a bit more.
Look at Bridget.
It could be better done. I don't think it nails the landing, this film, and it's all in service to get us to the end scene, which I like. And again, it's the scene that has a smile on my face, which is the is the walls of Jericho are coming down, which is this blanket they've been putting up between them. And again, it's the bang blanket. The bang blanket is coming down.
Bang blanket.
The bang is on. And that's the whole point of the movie, I think. Overall, again, I really liked this. It was speaking my language. It carried me along. It was fun. I think it's well paced. It's really well shot. Generally, I think the remaster looks really, really good. Because some of the movies, Cavalcade last week especially, looked like shit because nobody cares about that movie and nobody cares to kind of like, do you know what I mean? Go to the effort of touching it up and improving it to this quality. I think Clark Gable is a star with a capital S. I think Colbert is very good. Maybe got branded with that diva mark that stopped her coming to the forefront. And also, interestingly, these two actors were our age, or more or less, when they made this movie.
I mean, drinking cigarettes, just.
Well, it's funny, isn't it? Because it kind of rarely happens where you have a woman playing a bit younger, maybe, than she actually is.
Yes, that is a good point, actually. Yeah, it isn't something that is as...
Whereas actually they're the same age, more or less, but she's playing maybe 5 or 6 years young. She's playing more of an ingenue character, I think.
Yeah. She's obviously probably most famous for Cleopatra, which came out the same year and was nominated. So she had 2 nominations, or the movies that she was in.
Yeah, I think again one of these stars who was starlets. I think maybe be the term that was used at the time, who maybe never got to that kind of like Joan Crawford level of fame and success, but appeared in quite a lot of movies and to some acclaim and some really good movies from what I read.
We should finish this. We kind of maybe slightly remiss not to mention it from the top, but this is one of the very few movies that has won all of the kind of big 5 awards. So Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Actress, and Best Screenplay. I think 43 films have been nominated in all 5 of these categories. Only 3 films have won them. I'm just going to make sure that's actually correct because I thought it was maybe... it is 3. So One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, The Silence of the Lambs, and this are the only films to win all 5. And that's a fucking... It's unbelievable, actually, in the 90-odd years of doing the Oscars that we are. Only 3 films managed to achieve.
And I think that's more... I think that's... For this film, I think it's more about the director. I think it's more about how competently made it is and how... This must have been a people pleaser as a movie, I think, because this is kind of like appeals to all genres. This isn't, a war film. It's not a war film that's appealing to men. I think there is something here in the minds of 1934 men for women. Certainly, this is a comedy. It's funny. It's in an approachable-ish way where younger people would enjoy and understand kind of the humour that's going on here, which I think is a testament to why it was so successful. It made loads of money for 1934.
Yeah.
And it was so successful at the Academy Awards.
2.5 million off a 300,000 odd budget in 1934, and also I think just it obviously reflected the spirit of the time, and racy and tantalizing, and yet you've got this probably quite there's a sense here of what's happening in the 30s. Maybe again we're picking up on some of the social pressures and taboos, even though Colbert called it the worst picture in the world when she'd finished it. Again, I think you see that performance on the screen for me, but clearly audiences and the Academy didn't agree because they furnished her with an Academy Award win for Best Actress. So, as usual, Dave, just because we, or me from my council of wokery ivory tower that I've now constructed, don't enjoy a movie doesn't mean that actually the success comes from the box office, and that's probably why we've had more and more romantic comedies like this in the same vein, because it's a formula that clearly works.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting. Do you think that like Colbert is part of the inspiration for the lead in Norma Desmond in Sunset Boulevard? I haven't got a list in front of me of the people that inspired it, but possibly. It feels like her kind of like, do you know what I mean? Her issues with directors, and I think this wasn't the only time that she was accused of kind of like being a bit of a diva.
Yeah, I think so many of.
No, she's not.
Actors.
She's not on the main list. I don't think, like the big list, but
the influence.
I think definitely in that kind of like in that lumped in with that.
In that vein. Yeah.
And we forget this is also kind of like an era of studio movies, a bit like we're in sort of even worse than it is now, I think, where 90% of all the movies would be made by 4 or 5 big studios who had all the big stars under contract and kind of like control the lives of these people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a fascinating thing, and as usual, watching these movies from the past, getting up to nearly 100 years ago, is so instructive. It gives us those breadcrumb trails to get us to the movies we watch today. Like all of basically every single 90s romantic comedy is effectively this movie, with an obnoxious man and a ditzy, clueless woman, and will they, won't they, and then at the end
Yes, Colin Firth's whole career.
Yes, Tom Hanks in a lot of movies. We've already mentioned Harry Met Sally, I think, which is another good one that lists it. So there we go. Next time, Dave, we're going to be diving into Mutiny on the Bounty, which we've already mentioned. So we'll say hello again to Clark Gable. We'll also say hello again to Frank Lloyd as director, who did Cavalcade a couple of episodes ago.
Oh.
I know. But maybe it'll be better this time. Maybe?
We've been hurt before. What's the general rule of thumb? If you're going to start a Best Picture rewatch, skip the 30s.
But then we'd miss, if you skip the 30s, then we'd miss Gone with the Wind in 39, which I think is, got to talk about that one, haven't you? The
All Quiet on the Western Front. I'm still going to say you haven't changed my mind. I think this is still a really fun movie, and I think there is enjoyment to be had here.
Yes, I think so, especially if you are a raving misogynist like Dave. That's right.
Join me on my Joe Rogan spin-off podcast, where I mention Joe Rogan's name 15 times per episode to make sure that all the people know that they're in the right place.
Joe Rogan, Joe Rogan, Joe Rogan. It's quite hard to say quickly.
Red lorry, blue lorry, red lorry, yellow lorry, red lorry, yellow lorry. She sells seashells down the seashore.
Yes, to fund her right-wing Joe Rogan podcast. So join Dave as he ventures forth. But until then, thanks for listening to All the Best Pictures. We're going to go dig up the corpse of Clark Gable to reanimate so we can enjoy more of his movies.
Do you reckon this movie's going to be pirate-y, Sam? Should we get our pirate?
I think
when you're a professional mutiny, I reckon there's a lot of pirate-themed jokes we could get out next week.
Yeah, 18th century nautical humour coming right at you on a podcast that just can't quit. That's us.
We won't quit. You can't take us off the air.
Just try. See you next time.